In this video, we're going to observe how we can export a result set to a database. Exporting results to Excel files and CSV files is great for specific use cases, but it doesn't necessarily lead to the most efficient automated process that you may be striving for. Data that is stored and maintained in a database is much more controllable, as well as scalable. You can create automated solutions that, with one click of an Alteryx workflow, sources data directly from a database, then performs some form of transformation, and then sends the data back to a database. You could then have visualization software such as Tableau that sits on top of the database table with a live connection, which means your dashboards and charts are automatically updated when the new data hits the database table. This can create some really efficient analytics processes, which requires very little manual involvement, once set up of course. So let's see a quick example of sending data to a database and then perform some quick analytics on it using SQL. We will then apply a quick visualization of the data using Tableau to illustrate how efficient updates can be, which we will do by changing our data through Alteryx. So let's begin. Once again, for continuity, we will use the small workflow that transforms the pet store sales dataset, and we'll drag an output tool onto the canvas. This time, rather than selecting an Excel file as our output, we will click on Data Sources on the left-hand side, and then we will select the MySQL database, as this is the database I'm using. Now obviously, providing Alteryx has a connector to the database you're using, you'll be able to connect to it. I can then pick and choose which MySQL data source I'm sending it to. So in this instance, I will send my result to a schema called Sakilla, and I can then establish a connection to the database using my username and password. If you haven't got a connection established, you will need to do so by clicking on ODBC admin and then inputting your connection details. Once I've provided these details, Alteryx will ask us for a table name that we want to store the result set in. So for this example, I will call our table Alteryx_result. Now you can see we have a few configuration options, but the one I want to draw your attention to first is the output options. The first time we create this table, we will need to have this set to create new table, because the table doesn't exist at the moment. Keeping everything else the same, if we now run the workflow, you can see that the 169 records have been written to the database within our new table called Alteryx_result. So let's go across to the database to make sure that this is the case. If I write a simple select star query using SQL, you can see the result appears just as we would expect. Now let's try to run the workflow again. Notice that if I try to run the workflow again, it will not work, as the table name already exists and is unable to create a table using the same name, very similar to what we saw with the Excel file outputs. So before I forget, I want to now change this option to be overwrite table, (drop), so that my table is replaced with the new information every time I run the workflow. Now this may not be what you want to do in your workflow. In fact, you may want to append data to your existing database table rather than deleting the whole thing. So it is very much a case-by-case basis in how you configure your output. So be careful in your configuration. You don't want to accidentally delete tables from your database. So use test tables first to ensure the operation is working as per expectation and make any necessary backups of your data. The great thing about using Alteryx to write data back to the database is that you can run pre and post SQL statements that are performed on the database when you run your workflow. So picture this scenario. You have some data that you want to load into the database. The data pertains to December sales. You want to delete all the existing records in the database that pertain to December and replace them with the new ones to be added via the workflow. In order to do this, we can enter in a pre-create SQL statement, which deletes records where date is December. What this means is that the delete query is executed first. The workflow is then run and the new data is appended to the database table. If you had a post-create SQL statement in as well, this would run after the workflow has executed, so you have a lot of control over the database. Okay, so now we have the database table set up, let's quickly create a Tableau chart that displays a view on this data. Okay, so first of all, in Tableau, I will connect to the database where our new result resides. So I can select MySQL as the database and then put in my connection details. I can then connect to the table, which in this case is the Alteryx_result table. Let's just construct a quick bar chart which shows the sum of sales by city. And we will also show a breakdown of each chart by month. And we'll do this by dragging the month column onto the colour shelf. I can see we have a large block here which actually pertains to the total. So let me filter this out accordingly so it doesn't skew the result. Okay, great. I can tell this chart will be useful for others. But I've just been told there is some missing data from the pet store in Douglas. This needs to be corrected. So let's go back across to our Alteryx workflow and make the necessary adjustment. Just before the final output, I'm going to add a formula tool and then update the January sales figure for Douglas to be 1 million higher. An unrealistic adjustment, but one that will certainly show a clear change in the final chart. So we can type if month equals January and city equals Douglas, then sales plus 1 million. Else, for all other records, take the sales figure. We can then end the if statement here. If we now run the workflow and then go across to the Tableau report we've just created and refresh the database, we have an updated result without having to make any change directly in the database or any change in the final visualization. So although we've touched on databases and Tableau here, I'm hoping this shows how Alteryx can integrate with other software to create seamless automated solutions. If you're keen on expanding your data analytics skill set across all 3 platforms visited in this video, I would love to see you inside my Tableau Fundamentals course, where we go through key functionality and concepts when it comes to creating dashboards and effective visualizations using Tableau. I also have an 11-hour course on database querying essentials using SQL, which will strengthen your skill set even more, leading to efficient automated solutions for you, your stakeholders, and your organization.